The TRS-80 Model I took the world by storm. It had a 70% market share the year it launched, and they sold 100,000 machines in 1978, far outstripping its rivals. Yet by the early 1980s, Radio Shack's line of home computers was becoming irrelevant. How did a company that hadn't even looked at a computer a year before it launched the TRS-80 create something so highly effective on their first try? And how did it become out of date so quickly? This is a TRS-80 Model I story. Before the Altair 8800 became popular, the thought of having a computer in the home was unimaginable, such was the exorbitant cost of a mainframe computer or a mini computer. But when connected to a teletype, hobbyists found that they could turn this box of blinking lights into something that could run computer programs like those big expensive machines that they were using at work. One such person was Don French. He was a buyer for Texas-based Tandy Corporation, the company that had thousands of Radio Shack stores across America. They sold everything from complete quadraphonic separate hi-fi systems to an individual diode for your latest electronics project. Don showed his setup to Tandy's vice president of manufacturing, who thought selling a home computer at Radio Shack might just work. On the surface it made sense. Computers were expensive and hard to use in 1976, but component prices were dropping. If a computer was sold pre-assembled and bundled with the right hardware and software, like the easy-to-understand basic programming language, they could become something refined enough for the everyday person to understand. But there were worries as well. In 1976, computers looked like this. They were only found in the office or in the bedrooms of geeks who could spend the equivalent of a used car to buy one and who had the necessary soldering skills to put it together. Tandy was a conservative company that didn't want to get burnt investing and overstocking technology that wouldn't sell, like quadraphonic hi-fi from a couple of years earlier. Some people at the company thought selling a complex computer to the public was a fool's errand. Any computer Tandy produced wouldn't be cheap. At the high end of what they usually carried, the Altair cost the same as one of Radio Shack's separate hi-fi bundles. Would there be enough demand for something without a clear practical use? But surely if any shop in America could sell a computer, it was Radio Shack. This wasn't a department store. It sold kit radios and 100-in-1 electronics projects. They were even starting to stock early home computer game systems. The sort of early adopters that will buy a home computer already made a mainline for Radio Shack every Saturday morning. The team making Tandy's computer initially thought of selling the computer as a kit, but that idea was quickly dismissed. Assembling a computer was a lot harder than a radio, and testing individual components beforehand out of circuit wasn't easy without specialist equipment. It was decided Tandy's machine would be the first home computer to come pre-assembled. Radio Shack sold budget items, so the team decided to shoot for a $199 retail price, 40% of the cost of the Altair. The team started with a design from Don French, but Tandy felt it wasn't good enough. Whilst on a fact-finding trip to Silicon Valley, where the homebrew computer community was blossoming, they enlisted Steve Leininger from National Semiconductor. That company had produced the SCMP processor, but even though Steve was more than familiar with it, he didn't think it was the right fit. The team evaluated using the Altair's Intel 8080 and the Motorola 6800, but neither worked for their bare-bones low-cost computer. Zilog was a chip design company founded in 1974 by two ex-Intel employees. Their first product, the Z80, launched in the summer of 1976, just when Tandy was starting their CPU search. After trying it, Tandy's team decided it would be the best choice, but it was expensive, $200. That was the retail price of their entire system. But Zilog was a young, scrappy company. Maybe Tandy could get a special price. Steve Leininger phoned them and got the CPU he wanted for a fraction of the retail price, and Zilog got a great launch partner to showcase their new chip. Whilst working at National Semiconductor, Steve had written the first draft of an interpreter for the basic programming language, But for Tandy's machine, maybe due to cost, he decided to port the codebase for the public domain Tiny Basic to the Z80. It fit in a 2K ROM chip, which made for an implementation which would really limit the machine. And with only 1K reserved for video memory, there wouldn't be high-resolution graphics either. But some of the character memory was reserved for segmented blocks, and there were commands to draw in these chunky 128 by 48 low-resolution graphics. Decisions like this were being made so the computer could hit that very low retail price. Like Sinclair's early machines, it would have a cheap membrane keyboard with the motherboard packaged in the same case. It would forego lowercase letters and memory would be just 1K. The screen was extra, but at least the computer could be hooked up to a standard television. Then there was the question of how to load and save programs. Mini computers and mainframes use large floppy disks and primitive hard drives, but these were both far too expensive for this budget system. Mainframes also stored data on reel-to-reel tape, and there was a budget equivalent, home audio tape. Tandy weren't the first to hit upon this idea, but it made perfect sense. 8-track was still a thing, and it's possible that they could have used an 8-track recorder, but these were expensive, and as they changed tracks, there was a gap in the audio which would have meant software failed to load. No, the best solution was the compact cassette. It could record up to 60 minutes of audio on each side and could be had for less than $30, thanks to the popularity of cassette dictation machines. They had earphone and microphone sockets that allowed them to connect to a computer to load and save data, and as luck would have it, Radio Shack already carried a wide range that they could sell to customers. A prototype computer was built using Radio Shack breadboards and components, of course. It was demonstrated to the CEO, Charles Tandy, in February 1977. They coded a dummy tax program to show how this could be of use to a small business or in the home. Charles typed in 150,000 and the program crashed. The 2K BASIC could only handle whole numbers and nothing over 2 bytes or 65,535. This was the point when the team realized that they needed to stretch to 4K BASIC that could at least handle floating point numbers. By now, the idea of a membrane keyboard had also been ditched. I mean, the computer was bargain basement, but it also had to be usable. The computer wouldn't hit the $199 price goal, but would at least have a full-size keyboard. Charles Tandy didn't let the team know just yet, but he'd already decided that the project would go ahead. It showed Tandy at the forefront of technology, so even if the product didn't sell well, it would be a marketing win for the company. But if it did well, this could be a game changer for Tandy, a company that was looking for the next new technology that would keep customers coming into their stores. Soon work was underway writing a companion book that taught complete novices how to set up their computer with a quick introduction to BASIC, plus a comprehensive guide and reference for what Tandy called Level 1 BASIC, meaning presumably they were already thinking about what Level 2 BASIC might be. The team began work on pre-packaged software like accountancy, and the computer also finally got its name, the TRS-80, for Tandy Radio Shack and 80 for the Z80 processor. Charles Tandy might see the value of the TRS-80, but upper management remained unconvinced. They set the initial run at just 1,000 units, which was reluctantly upped to 3,000, essentially one machine for every Radio Shack store. At least those branches could use it for stock taking if it failed. This was a classic case of middle-aged people not seeing a next-generation product that young people could see was inevitable. It's a pattern that countless generations have made, and I'm sure will continue to make. But before Tandy could launch their new machine, they were beaten to the punch. The Apple II launched in June 1977. Like the TRS-80, it could load and save programs from a cassette, but it also offered high-resolution graphics and even a crude way of displaying color. So when the TRS-80 launched just 2 months later, it had its work cut out to prove itself against a tough competitor. At the event, 6 machines were demonstrated and all of them worked flawlessly. The prototype had just 1K of memory, but the final version matched the Apple II with 4K, expandable to 52K, meaning it could run real programs. It might not have color and high-resolution graphics, but it had one killer feature: price. Where the Apple II was $1,298, the TRS-80 was less than a third of that at just $399. Or for $599, you could get a bundle that included a cassette recorder and a 12-inch monitor, really a converted black and white RCA TV using a composite input. It was a much better deal, but it was still expensive. To give you a sense of what $599 was back in 1977, that's about the same price as an Apple Vision Pro today. Tandy also outlined impressive expansion plans that included color, RAM expansion, music, floppy disk drives, printers, and a modem. I'm sure this announcement was partly to show the TRS-80 had an answer to the Apple II, but it's true that much of this was in development before Apple's launch. A computer was something new and different, so Tandy could maybe be forgiven for inviting journalists that knew very little about computers or their significance. They came away unimpressed, not understanding just what this device could be used for. The launch bombed, quite literally. That same day, a terrorist organization set off 2 bombs in New York City, so the news of Tandy's new wonder machine was buried. No matter, lackluster reviews from journalists that didn't care for the machine wouldn't have done much in any case. Tandy had much more success 2 days later at the Personal Computer Fair at Boston University. That audience got the significance of the TRS-80. At a time when hobbyists were hand-assembling simplistic computers, here was a fully finished computer with its own screen that worked perfectly. Just plug it in and go. The booth was packed. After the show, Tandy got hundreds of orders. Headquarters got 15,000 calls, which melted the switchboard. Soon there were 10,000 pre-orders, and Tandy had to instigate a $100 deposit just to be put on the waiting list. Production ramped up slowly. At the start, only 1 machine was completed every day, but thanks to Tandy's ability to assemble electronic gadgets, it soon ramped up as their new computer became wildly popular. 7 out of every 10 computers sold in 1977 was a TRS-80, and remember, they only announced it in August. In early 1978, the waiting list was 2 months, but in that year they sold 100,000 machines, more than 4 times its nearest competitor. Marketing kicked into high gear, with Tandy emphasizing all the things this inexpensive computer could do.
Radio Shack used space-age technology to create a compact computer for home and business, the TRS-80 microcomputer system. Record this much paperwork and more, all on inexpensive cassette tapes. Compute budgets, taxes, investments, payrolls, inventory. Ideal for home or business. It's easy to use, and Radio Shack makes it affordable. Under $600, the TRS-80 compact computer, only at Radio Shack.
At a time when a calculator was something pretty cool, Tandy's machine could do highly complex calculations, then be reprogrammed to do the home finances, help with recipes in the kitchen, teach the kids mathematics, do the payroll, and then if there was some free time, maybe play a game. The introductory guide was clear and friendly, almost essential to introduce it to a public that had no clue how to use a computer or what it could do. And it used a programming language that was easy to use. Rather than intimidating, Tandy made home computers welcoming. With a hit on their hands, Tandy wanted to build on their success. With most customers saying that they were buying the computer for work, the TRS-80's focus would be primarily on business customers, then education, and finally the home. To that end, they were dedicated Tandy computer retail stores that began to sell a range of peripherals and even furniture. Level 1 Basic was an amazing feat to fit into 4K, but in some aspects it was still very limited. Users could only use 2 string variables, A string and B string. There were only 26 numeric variables from A to Z and 1 array. It was replaced with 12K Level 2 Basic licensed from Microsoft that fixed many of these deficiencies and made the TRS-80 more usable with features that included line editing, doubling of cassette load speeds, faster graphics, double precision floating point numbers, variable names that could have more than one letter, and automatic line renumbering. Your Level 1 computer could be upgraded to Level 2, it was just a ROM swap. Then there was the option of lowercase letters and a number pad. The TRS-80 had no sound, but it was possible to make square wave tones by outputting data to the cassette port, something some games took advantage of to provide a little more excitement. An expansion interface offered serial and parallel interfaces, a real-time clock, and allowed the connection of up to 4 floppy disk drives. Despite the additional $299 price for the expansion interface and $499 for one floppy disk drive, when it initially released, demand outstripped supply. At one point, Tandy was 6 months behind on disk drive orders and 9 months on Level 2 basic ROMs. The base computer could be upgraded to 16K, but that involved swapping out the chips on the motherboard, which wasn't for the faint of heart. A much easier option was adding chips to the expansion interface. Then there was a range of printers. Radio Shack was happy to upgrade your $599 base system to an eye-popping $3,874 business system with all the bells and whistles. With Tandy expanding around the world, the TRS-80 went global, with the company hoping to replicate the success that they'd seen in the USA. Radio Shack also offered software on cassette that included a range of productivity and games, and even a course in programming basic. The software wasn't the best on the market, and Radio Shack shot themselves in the foot somewhat by refusing to stock any third-party software and hardware. The ban was absolute. Salespeople couldn't talk about other products that might be of use to customers, or even mention that there were more third-party programs available for the TRS-80 than all other systems combined. Something that, might help to make a sale? This came from the way Radio Shack stores worked. They only sold items produced by Tandy with brand names like Archer, Micronta, and of course Realistic. The idea of selling third-party hardware and software was an alien concept and was out of the question. And that was a shame, because those third-party programs were often far better. Who wanted to play blackjack when they could play Ultima for the Apple II? It didn't help that Charles Tandy, the architect of Radio Shack's success, had unexpectedly died in 1978, and the company was now run by a committee that lacked any flair. With Radio Shack's software embargo, third-party companies had a hard time reaching customers, so successful companies like Broderbund Software decided not to bother. This hobbled the TRS-80, as home computers would come to live and die on the range of third-party software. It's no surprise that VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet and a program that quickly became a business necessity, was first released on the Apple II. By 1980, competition from machines like the Atari 400 was starting to put pressure on the 3-year-old TRS-80. Tandy's machine might be cheap, but it also lacked high-res graphics, decent sound and colour. The price dropped to $499, but business systems still went for astronomical prices. The software range expanded with a mixed bag that included time accounting for job contractors, terminal software, a word processor, and concrete takeoff, which allowed people in the concrete industry to bid for jobs. Those who used the word processor had a larger range of printers to choose from. There were new items like a modem that allowed you to connect to mainframes or send what people were already calling electronic mail, plus gadgets like a voice synthesizer and a Voxbox TM that claimed your TRS-80 could respond to your voice commands. We all know that 1980 voice recognition was absolutely awful, which is maybe why Tandy covered themselves by calling it not yet fully perfected technology, which was probably the understatement of the year. When the Model II range launched to capitalize on the business market, the original TRS-80 was renamed the Model I. In subsequent years, we'd get the Model 3 and the Model 4, but by 1980, sales had already begun to slow. Tandy were chasing the business market that they felt held the most profit. But the TRS-80 and its limited choice of software didn't work for many businesses, and after the initial excitement, customers found it impractical to write their own software. And due to the TRS-80's memory map, it couldn't run the most popular business operating system of the time, CP/M. No, the key markets for microcomputers in the late 1970s and early 1980s were schools and the home, with parents buying one for their kids to help their education and to learn next generation programming skills. What these young people wanted when they got one though was games. Blocky TRS-80 graphics just didn't cut it. By 1981, Tandy launched the lower cost, superior TRS-80 color computer, and the original Model I was discontinued, but the new machines still found it hard to compete against exciting new competitions such as Commodore's VIC-20. 1977 came to be seen as a gold rush by three computer companies, Apple, Tandy and Commodore. That year, each released an excellent product, and Tandy took an early lead with its built-in distribution mechanism to Middle America, which offered a clear place to repair or upgrade your newfangled computer. Launched only 8 months after they got formal approval, the TRS-80 was a clever design that gave people their first taste of a computer and taught them BASIC in a fun and friendly way. It used a revolutionary new processor, the Z80, and it shows Steve Leininger's foresight at seeing its potential to be the heart of a low-cost machine. Z80 home computers took off, and the processor had a long and happy life as a low-cost chip, only ending production in 2024, almost 50 years after production began. That wasn't to say that the TRS-80 was perfect, far from it. On the back, Tandy, in their wisdom, used 3 5-pin DIN sockets. It's not a bad socket design, they can't be inserted the wrong way, and it was a common type of connector at the time, being used in, amongst other things, hi-fi separates. But the idea of using the same connector for the monitor, cassette and power meant that connecting the wrong lead into the wrong socket could, at a minimum, cause frustration that the computer wasn't working, and at its worst meant your new expensive computer went bang. Radio Shack didn't have the best reputation for quality, and there were some that saw the TRS-80 or Trash 80 as bargain basement, lacking the refinement of other machines. Early keyboards weren't great and suffered from keyboard bounce, where one key press resulted in multiple keystrokes. CPU access to the screen memory caused a visible flicker. Tape loading was erratic and slow. The expansion interface connector used cheap contacts that needed to be regularly cleaned. TRS-DOS, the code to access disk drive storage, was hopelessly buggy. But like any product, the TRS-80 was built to a cost, and that cost made it easier for more people to try computers for the first time. Yes, it lacked good graphics, color, and easy access to sound, which meant it dated quickly. But the TRS-80 team had the foresight to add an expansion connector, and they used a flexible memory map, so it became much more than the original machine. They designed this all before any popular microcomputer had made it to market, so they were really trailblazing, and it's understandable that they might miss something that we now see as obvious. The TRS-80 Model I was used by homes and businesses well into the 80s and sometimes into the 1990s, running custom programs that hobbyists had created for their particular needs. The work done by Don French and Steve Leininger needs to be celebrated as much as Steve Wozniak, as is the vision of business leaders like Charles Tandy, who took a chance on the microcomputer and created a popular machine that went on to educate a generation of computer users. I hope you enjoyed this dip into the history of home computers. If you haven't seen my look at the history of BASIC, it's on the right, as is a video about my involvement in a Microsoft car stereo, no less, the Auto PC. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.